My father, she has that new promotion now. It is time she started using it to help this family instead of hiding it. My father, the reunion is the perfect opportunity to show everyone we are still the Harper family everyone respects. My father, if she will not lend her name to the foundation gala, then we will have to find another way to make her contribute. My father, Diane, you know how these things work. Appearances are everything. We cannot let her selfishness ruin what we have built. My father, she will do what I say this weekend, or she can find somewhere else to spend her holidays from now on. Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 32 years old. I was standing in the hallway of the old house when those words reached me from the parlor. My father's voice was quiet, but edged with that familiar certainty he used whenever he had already decided how things would go. I had driven down from Atlanta the night before for the Memorial Day reunion, the one my family had held at the historic home in Georgia for as long as I could remember. I had not even carried my bag upstairs yet. The sound of my stepmother's softer reply drifted out next, but I could not make out the words. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, one hand resting on the banister, letting the weight of what I had overheard settle. Then I stepped into the parlor and watched both of them look up at the same time. My father's expression shifted instantly into the smooth version he kept for family gatherings. My stepmother smiled the small, careful smile she always wore when company was expected. Emily, my father said, "You are early. We were just going over the schedule for the weekend." I set my bag down by the door. Traffic was light. I thought I could help before everyone else gets here. My stepmother nodded. "That is thoughtful. We have the foundation gala coming up next month, and your father and I were saying how useful it would be to have your name attached. With the promotion you just received, it would carry real weight in the community." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one that always appeared when they framed a demand as a compliment. I had worked late for months to earn the new role at the marketing firm. I had not mentioned the title change to anyone in the family because I already knew how the conversation would unfold. They would see it as another resource that belonged to the family name rather than to me. "I am still getting settled into the position," I said, keeping my tone even. "I am not sure I can take on anything additional right now." My father waved a hand as if I had mentioned something minor. "It is not additional, it is family. The foundation has carried the Harper name for 3 generations. We all do our part to keep it strong." My stepmother added, "Your cousin Jessica is already helping with the silent auction. Your brother Michael is handling the venue logistics. It would look strange if you were the only one not involved." I did not answer right away. The room felt smaller than it had a minute earlier. I picked up my bag again and said I needed to unpack before the others arrived. Neither of them tried to stop me. As I climbed the stairs, I heard my father's voice resume lower this time, and I did not need to hear the words to know they were continuing the same conversation. The next morning, the kitchen was already full when I came down. My brother Michael and his wife Rebecca were there with their 2 children. My cousin Jessica was pouring coffee at the counter. My uncle Robert had arrived late the night before and was reading the paper at the far end of the table. My stepmother moved between the stove and the table with practiced efficiency, setting out the good china the way she always did for these gatherings. My father sat at the head, already dressed for the day, watching everyone with the quiet attention he gave to any room he entered. Breakfast started with ordinary talk about the parade route and the weather. Then my father set his fork down and looked directly at me. "Emily, your stepmother and I have put your name on the gala invitation as a featured sponsor," he said. "The committee needs someone with your kind of professional standing to draw the right donors. It is already printed." I felt the table go still around me. Jessica paused with the coffee pot in her hand. Michael looked at his plate. Rebecca kept her eyes on her children. I set my own fork down carefully so it would not clink against the china. "I wish you had asked me before you did that," I said. My father's expression did not change. There was no time for a long discussion. The printers had a deadline. This is how family works. We step up when we are needed. My stepmother placed a hand on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive from the outside. It really is not much, Emily. A few meetings, your name on the programme, perhaps a short speech at the event. It would mean a great deal to everyone. I could feel the old script trying to pull me in. The version where I smiled, agreed, and absorbed the cost later in private. I had followed that script for years because arguing never changed the outcome, and because part of me still wanted to believe that if I did enough, I would finally feel like I belonged in the picture they kept polishing. I cannot commit to that right now, I said. I have obligations at work that I cannot rearrange on short notice. My father's voice stayed calm, but the edge underneath it was unmistakable. Obligations to strangers matter more than obligations to your own family. The question landed exactly where he intended it to. I felt the heat rise in my face, even though I had promised myself I would not react. Jessica set the coffee pot down a little harder than necessary. Uncle Robert cleared his throat but did not speak. My brother kept his eyes on his plate the way he had done since we were children. I stood up. "I need a minute," I said, and walked out through the back door onto the porch before anyone could answer. The air outside was cooler than the kitchen. I leaned against the railing and tried to steady my breathing. Behind me, the low murmur of voices started up again. I could not hear the words, but I knew the shape of the conversation. They would decide that I was being difficult, that I had always been difficult when it came to family responsibilities, that my new job had made me selfish. The narrative would be set before I even stepped back inside. I stayed on the porch longer than I needed to. When I finally went back in, the table had been cleared, except for my father and my stepmother. They were speaking quietly. My father looked up when I entered. "We will finish this discussion later," he said. "After the parade, there is no point in ruining the day for everyone else." I nodded once and went upstairs to my room. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone was on the nightstand where I had left it. I picked it up without thinking and saw that a voice message had come in while I was at breakfast. It was from my father. I pressed play without turning the volume down. His voice filled the small room. "She is going to make this difficult. She always does when she thinks she has leverage. Put her name on the program anyway. If she backs out publicly, it will look worse for her than for us. The community will see who is really committed to the family legacy." The message ended. I sat with the phone in my hand, listening to the silence that followed. Downstairs, I could hear the others moving around getting ready for the parade. Someone laughed. A child ran past the door. The house sounded exactly like it always had during these weekends, warm and full and carefully arranged. I set the phone down and looked at the closed door. The argument I had overheard the day before had not been an accident. The decision about the gala had not been a misunderstanding. They had already chosen the version of me that served the image they wanted to protect. The only question left was whether I would keep letting them use that version or whether I would finally stop. I did not have an answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, I knew I was not going to find it by staying quiet. The voicemail kept playing in my head as I walked back downstairs. My father's words about making it look worse for me if I backed out sat heavy, and I could already see how the rest of the day would unfold if I let it. The house was filling with the usual reunion sounds, doors opening, voices calling out greetings, the low hum of people settling into the familiar rhythm of these weekends. I kept my expression steady when I reached the kitchen again. My stepmother glanced up from the counter, where she was arranging flowers for the centerpieces. "You missed the start of the parade talk," she said, her tone light, but pointed enough that I felt the jab. "Your brother and Uncle Robert were just saying how nice it would be if the whole family walked together this year. It makes a better picture for the neighbors." My brother Michael looked over from where he was helping his kids with their shoes. He gave a small shrug that told me he had already heard the version of the story they wanted him to hear. "It is only a few blocks," he said. "Rebecca and the kids are excited about it." I nodded without committing. "I will see how the morning goes." My cousin Jessica caught my eye from across the room. She had been quiet since breakfast, but I saw the way she watched my stepmother move around the kitchen, like she was measuring every small interaction. Jessica had always been the one who noticed things the rest of us tried to smooth over. She did not say anything, then just gave me a quick private look that said she had heard the tone too. We made it through the parade without another direct confrontation, though my father kept finding ways to mention the gala in front of people we passed. Emily just got a big promotion at her firm, he would tell an old neighbour or someone from the foundation board. She is going to be a real asset when we announce the new fundraising push. Each time he said it, I felt the version of me he was selling settle a little deeper into the air around us. I smiled when people congratulated me. I did not correct him. By the time we returned to the house for lunch, the pressure had shifted into something quieter but harder to ignore. My stepmother pulled me aside near the dining room while the others were still coming in from outside. "Your father is only trying to protect what your grandfather built," she said, her voice low and reasonable. "The foundation has always been the thing that kept this family's name respected. When you hold back, it makes the rest of us look like we are not united. People notice those things in a town this size." I kept my hands still at my sides. "I am not holding back from the family. I am saying I cannot take on the gala committee right now without it affecting my job." She tilted her head slightly the way she did when she wanted to make a point without raising her voice. "Sometimes the job has to come second. That is what family means. Your father has carried this place and this name for years. He expects the same from his children." The words landed with the same weight they always had, dressed up as love and duty. I did not argue with her there in the hallway. I just said I needed to check something upstairs and walked away before she could add anything else. Behind me, I heard her sigh, soft and disappointed, the sound she made whenever I failed to fall in line quickly enough. I went to the small study at the end of the hall on the second floor, the one my father used when he was handling foundation paperwork during these weekends. I told myself I just needed a quiet minute, but once the door was closed, I found myself opening the bottom drawer of the old desk where he kept the older files. I was not looking for anything specific at first. I just needed something solid to hold on to while the rest of the day kept pulling at me. The folder was near the back, half hidden under a stack of old event programs. It was labelled with the foundation's name and a year from several years earlier. I opened it without thinking much about it. Inside were copies of donation records and some bank statements that looked like they had been printed and filed away and then forgotten. My name appeared on several of the lines, small amounts I had given over the years, the kind of quiet contributions I had made, because I still wanted to believe I was part of something that mattered to them. What I had not known was how those amounts had been used. There were notes attached, handwritten in my father's tight script about how the donations could be positioned publicly as larger gifts from the family as a whole, rather than from me specifically. One line mentioned routing part of a contribution through the foundation's general fund, so it could support an event that carried only my father's and my stepmother's names on the program. Another page showed a tax document where my earlier gift had been listed under the family's collective giving total, the way they preferred to present it to the community. I sat down in the desk chair and read through the pages again, slower this time. The numbers were not large, but the pattern was clear. They had taken what I offered quietly and reshaped it into something that served the image they wanted to keep. It was not theft in the legal sense. It was something smaller and more ordinary, the kind of everyday adjustment that let them keep telling the story that the Harper family always stood together at the center of everything good in town. I closed the folder and put it back exactly where I had found it. My hands felt cold even though the room was warm. Downstairs I could hear the others moving around the dining room, setting out plates for lunch. Someone laughed. My Uncle Robert's voice carried up the stairs, asking if anyone had seen the extra folding chairs. The house sounded normal, it always did. I stayed in the study a little longer, letting the discovery settle. The voice message from that morning and these old records sat side by side in my mind now. They had planned how to handle me if I pushed back. They had already decided how my contributions would be framed, whether I agreed or not. The coordinated effort was not new. I had simply stopped looking away from it. When I finally went back downstairs, the lunch table was full. My stepmother looked up as I took my seat. There you are. We were about to start without you. My father passed me a bowl of salad without commenting on where I had been. The conversation moved on to safe topics, someone's garden, the upcoming church picnic, the way the historic district always looked its best in late spring. I answered when someone spoke to me. I kept my voice even, but I could feel Jessica watching me again from her place across the table. At one point, she leaned over and asked quietly if I was all right. I told her I was fine. She did not push, but she did not look convinced either. After lunch, while the others were cleaning up or moving out to the porch, I stepped outside to get some air. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell from next door was walking her dog along the sidewalk. She had lived beside the historic home for as long as I could remember, and she had always been the kind of neighbour who noticed when something felt off, even if she never said it outright. She stopped when she saw me on the steps. "Emily," she said, her voice warm but careful. "I saw you all at the parade this morning. Your father made sure everyone knew about your new job. He seemed very proud." I managed a small smile. He likes to keep people updated. Mrs. Caldwell studied me for a second longer than usual. He also mentioned the gala. Said you were going to be the one bringing in the younger donors this year. I told him that sounded like a lot to put on someone who just started a new position. She paused, then added, "I hope he is not expecting too much." Families can sometimes forget that the people in them have lives outside the name on the mailbox. The words were gentle, but they landed with more force than anything my father or my stepmother had said all day. Someone outside the family had seen the pressure and named it without me having to explain. I thanked her and watched her continue down the sidewalk with her dog. When I turned back toward the house, my father was standing in the doorway watching the exchange. He did not say anything right away. He just waited until I reached the steps. "Mrs. Caldwell has always been nosy," he said, his tone mild. "She does not understand how families like ours operate. We take care of our own responsibilities first." I stopped on the bottom step. She was only being kind. My father's expression did not shift, but something in his eyes hardened. Kindness is not the same as loyalty. Remember that this weekend. He turned and went back inside before I could answer. I stayed on the steps for a moment, the sound of the door closing behind him, settling into the quiet afternoon. The voice message, the old records, and now this small warning from my father all pointed in the same direction. They had already decided what my role would be, and they were prepared to make it difficult if I did not accept it. I did not know yet what I was going to do with any of it, but standing there with the afternoon light on the old brick and the sound of my family moving around inside the house I had grown up visiting, I felt the first clear edge of a decision forming. I could keep absorbing the cost the way I always had, or I could stop pretending that their version of family was the only one that mattered. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of small tasks and careful conversations. I helped set up chairs for the evening cookout. I listened to my brother talk about work without really hearing the details. Jessica stayed close without asking more questions. My stepmother kept finding reasons to mention the gala in front of other relatives who had arrived. Each time I felt the weight of the decision I had not made, yet press a little harder. By the time the sun started to lower and the first guests for the cookout began to arrive, I had made up my mind about one small thing. I was not going to announce anything dramatic. I was not going to cause a scene in front of the neighbours or the extended family, but I was also not going to let them keep writing my part for me without at least knowing that I saw what they were doing. I found my father near the grill talking to my Uncle Robert about some foundation business. When there was a break in the conversation, I stepped closer. "I saw the old donation records in the study," I said, keeping my voice low enough that only he would hear. "The ones from a few years ago. I did not know you were listing my gifts under the family total on the public reports." My father did not look surprised. He just turned the burgers on the grill with the same steady motion he used for everything. It is cleaner that way. It keeps the focus on what the foundation accomplishes instead of who wrote the check. "You have always understood that." "I understood it when I thought it was mutual," I said. "I am not sure I do anymore." He set the tongs down and looked at me directly. The noise of the cookout continued around us, laughter, the sizzle of food, someone calling for another soda. But the space between us felt separate from all of it. "You are making this harder than it needs to be, Emily," he said. "The gala is one event, your name on one program. It costs you nothing, and it protects everything this family has worked to build. If you cannot see that, then perhaps you have been away from here too long." The words were calm. They were also final. He had already decided that any resistance from me was a failure of understanding on my part, not a legitimate boundary. I felt the old familiar ache rise up, the one that came from wanting the version of family he described and knowing it had never really existed on those terms. I did not argue with him there by the grill. I simply nodded once and stepped back into the flow of the evening. Later, when the cookout was in full swing and the string lights were on and people were laughing in small groups across the yard, I found Jessica again. She was sitting on the low wall near the garden, away from the main cluster of voices. "I heard what he said to you earlier," she said quietly, "about the records. I did not know they were doing that with your donations either." I sat down beside her. "It is not about the money. It is about the way they decide what counts as family and what does not." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "My mum always said the same thing about this side of the family, that the image mattered more than the people inside it. I did not really believe her until I got older and saw how they treat anyone who steps outside the lines." We sat there while the evening moved around us. The neighbour, Mrs. Caldwell, waved from her own porch across the fence. I waved back. My father was across the yard talking to a group of people from the foundation board, his voice carrying just enough for me to catch the words "Emily's promotion" and "proud of what she is doing for the family." The story was still being told even while I was sitting right there. I did not correct him. Not that night. But the decision that had started forming on the steps earlier had settled into something clearer. I was not going to keep showing up for these weekends the way I always had, dropping everything when they called and absorbing the cost when they decided what my role would be. The spontaneous visits, the casual weekends where I drove down without a second thought, those were going to have to stop. I could not keep pretending the price was worth it just to stay inside a picture that had never really included the real version of me. The rest of the reunion passed without another direct confrontation. My father did not bring up the gala again in front of me that night. My stepmother kept her smiles in place and her comments measured. Jessica stayed nearby without asking for more than I was ready to give. When the last guest left and the house grew quiet again, I packed my bag and left early the next morning before anyone else was up. I did not leave a note. I sent a short text to my brother and my cousin saying I had an early meeting back in Atlanta and would catch up later. The drive home was long and mostly silent. I kept the radio off. Every few miles I thought about the voicemail, still saved on my phone, and the folder in the study drawer, and the way my father had looked at me by the grill. None of it felt resolved. I had not won anything. I had simply stopped agreeing to lose by their rules. When I got back to my apartment, I deleted the saved voicemail. I did not need to keep the recording to remember what it said. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and looked at the calendar on my wall. The next family weekend was marked in pencil, the way I had always marked them lightly, so it would be easy to erase if something came up. I picked up the pencil and erased the date. Then I wrote nothing in its place. The house in Georgia would still be there. The foundation galas would still happen. My father and my stepmother would still tell the story they preferred about how the family always came together when it mattered. I would not be in the picture they were painting anymore, at least not on the terms they had set. The cost of that choice was the easy, automatic weekends I used to take for granted, the ones where I could drive down without thinking and still believe I belonged in the middle of it all. I had chosen myself instead. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like the only honest thing left to do. And even though the house and the name and the carefully maintained image would go on without me, I knew I could live with the quieter version of my life that came after. I just was not sure yet what that version would look like on the days when the old ache for belonging tried to pull me back. The weeks after the reunion settled into a quieter rhythm than I had expected, though the quiet carried its own weight. My father did not call to ask why I had left without a proper goodbye. My stepmother sent one brief text about the gala program being finalized and my name no longer appearing on it, as if the matter had resolved itself the moment I stopped agreeing to it. I replied with a short acknowledgement and let the thread end there. The calendar on my wall stayed blank where the next family weekend had always been marked in light pencil, easy to erase. Work at the marketing firm filled the hours in a way that finally felt like it belonged to me alone. The promotion I had earned no longer carried the invisible calculation of how it might be borrowed for someone else's image. Evenings stretched long and mostly empty. I did not find myself reaching for the phone to check if anyone from Georgia had reached out, and when the old impulse surfaced, I let it pass without acting on it. The spontaneous drives down to the historic home, the ones I used to make without a second thought, simply stopped happening. One afternoon in early summer, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. It was Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell from next door to the family house. She apologized for calling out of the blue and explained that my cousin Jessica had given her my number after mentioning I might appreciate hearing from someone who had watched the family from outside the immediate circle for many years. I saw how the weekend unfolded, she said, her voice steady and without any rush to fill the silence. Your father has always been skilled at presenting the family as perfectly united. I have lived beside that house long enough to know the performance requires constant upkeep. I just wanted you to know that someone saw the cost you were being asked to carry, and that stepping back from it does not make you the problem. Her words landed with a gentleness I had not known I needed. She did not ask me to explain my choice or defend the distance I was creating. She simply offered the perspective of someone who had observed the carefully maintained image for decades without being required to live inside it. In that conversation, Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell became the quiet witness who confirmed what I had already begun to understand. The story my father and stepmother told about loyalty and legacy was not the full truth for everyone who carried the Harper name. We spoke for a while longer. She told me the gala had proceeded exactly as planned, with the focus returned to my father and stepmother, as the central figures and my earlier contributions quietly absorbed into the family total on the public reports. The community still saw the same polished version of the family it had always seen. Nothing on the outside had fractured because I had chosen not to keep supplying the pieces. That single phone call became an anchor in the months that followed. It did not deliver justice or force any acknowledgement from my father. It simply gave me external confirmation that the pressure I had felt was real, and that refusing to keep absorbing it was not a failure of character. Mrs. Caldwell checked in every few months after that first call. She never pressed for details or positioned herself as an ally in any dramatic sense. She simply let me know that the view from next door remained unchanged and that the performance continued exactly as it always had. When my father reached out again several months later, it was about a smaller family gathering tied to the foundation. His message was brief and carried the same calm certainty he had always used the family would be there when I remembered what mattered most. I read it twice before replying. I told him I would not be attending and that I needed space to build a life measured by something other than how well it served the family name and image. I kept the message short and clear without apology or explanation that invited negotiation. His response arrived the next day. It was measured and without visible anger. He wrote that he understood I was going through a difficult phase and that the door would remain open whenever I was ready to return to the responsibilities that came with being part of the family. The tone was the same one he had used my entire life when I pushed against the expectations he set. It assumed time, and the pull of belonging would eventually bring me back into the picture on the terms he had always defined. I did not reply again. The ache for the version of family I had once wanted did not vanish. There were still days when the turnoff toward the historic home in Georgia appeared in my mind and the old longing surfaced. Each time I kept driving past it, the longing grew a little less insistent. I filled the weekends that had once belonged to spontaneous visits with things that were mine alone, long walks through the city, dinners with friends who expected nothing from me except my actual presence. Quiet evenings where I could work or rest without calculating how any of it might look to people who only saw the polished surface. My value, I came to understand in those months, had never lived in what I could provide to protect or enhance the family image. It lived in the ordinary courage of saying no when the cost had become too high to keep paying in silence. Choosing myself did not feel like a triumph or even like revenge. It felt like the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone I could recognize without the old script running underneath every interaction. The spontaneous weekend visits I used to take for granted were gone, replaced by a deliberate distance that felt both necessary and lonely. My father and my stepmother continued to host the gatherings and maintain the foundation's public presence exactly as they always had. The community still saw the Harper family as the steady, generous pillar it had appeared to be for generations. The story they preferred remained intact because I had stopped volunteering to appear in it on their terms. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell's quiet presence on the other end of an occasional phone call became the small, steady reminder that someone outside the performance had seen what it cost. She never asked me to come back or suggested I owed the family another chance. She simply let me know that the view from next door had not changed, and that my choice to step outside the frame made sense to someone who had watched the frame being built for years. There was no final confrontation where my father acknowledged the ways he and my stepmother had reshaped my contributions to fit the image they protected. The voice message from the reunion stayed deleted. The folder of old records remained in the study drawer where I had found it. The family story continued without me in it, polished and unbroken from the outside. I accepted that as the price of the boundary I had drawn. It was not the ending I had once hoped for, the one where understanding arrived and the pattern changed. It was quieter, heavier, and more final than that. But it was mine. I still feel the pull on certain days, the old habit of measuring myself against what the family needed me to be. When it rises, I remember Mrs. Caldwell's words about the cost of the performance and the ordinary courage it takes to stop volunteering for a part that never truly fit. That memory does not erase the loss of the spontaneous weekends or the easy belonging I once believed was possible. It simply reminds me that the version of family I walked away from was never the one I had been promised. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever reached the point where keeping the peace meant slowly disappearing inside someone else's version of who you should be, and you chose yourself anyway, comment freedom below. I would love to hear how you carried that choice forward in your own life.